We're in verse 10, and this is how to lodge a complaint with God. How to lodge a complaint with God. And we're going to look at this section here. This is Jeremiah's complaint, and it says this: "Woe is me, my mother, that you bore me, a man of strife and contention to the whole land. I have not lent, nor have I borrowed, yet all of them curse me." So how's Jeremiah feeling? Well, he's feeling as if everybody's against him. And why is he feeling that way? Because everyone was against him. And why were they against him? Because he was delivering the word of God. He was calling a people, a spiritual people, who should have been growing. They should have been growing. And not only were they not growing, they'd gone back. They'd walked away from where they should have been going. They let compromise in. You know what happens when you let 1 degree of compromise in? You keep going, you're light years away from where you should have been. This is why Christians continually need to be repenting. We do, because we are creatures who drift. So here's a point that I think should not be lost on us as we read this. Here's Jeremiah, my opinion, the most successful prophet in the Old Testament. His opinion, the most unsuccessful prophet ever. So this is something I think we need to get from this text. Firstly, even good, God-loving people will have down times. And everybody said, "Oh me." Because we do. We will have down times. But as someone has said, when you're walking with God, there are times in your life when that walk goes through a tunnel. And sometimes you'll have these experiences of life where it is dark, but you're in the middle of the tunnel. This is not the end game, it's the middle. And for Jeremiah, this right now is the middle of the tunnel. Now, you know that when you're really down, you see no point to going on, but please go on. You're in the middle of the tunnel, and I've got to tell you now, this world is a much better place for having you in it. Really it is. And here's Jeremiah in this predicament in his life, and this is what I think we need to know. We need to recognize the road signs in the middle of the tunnel. Because the road signs look like this: when you are down, your perspective on life becomes distorted. Verse 11. "The Lord said to me, have I not set you free for their good?" Now notice that this is God speaking. "Have I not pleaded for you before the enemy in the time of trouble and in the time of distress?" Now, what time of trouble? What time of distress? What enemy? See, this is a part of the problem for Jeremiah. He's been telling the people, an enemy is coming, you're going to come into a time of distress and a time of trouble. And the people are going, "On you, Jeremiah, you've been carrying on about this for 14 and a half chapters, and none of it has happened. None of it. You're a false prophet, Jeremiah." And God says to Jeremiah, in the midst of his depression, "Jeremiah, the distress, the trouble, and the enemy that's coming, I've organised it so that you won't be a victim of it." And so this is the point, that when we look to the Lord, he always sustains those who serve him. He always. So when it's tough, the scriptures promise us that God will not allow us to go through anything that we cannot get through. That's what it says. So God always sustains those who look to him. Verse 12. "Can one break iron from the north, and bronze?" Their iron was hard, like really hard. And God is saying to Jeremiah, you're like that. You're like iron from Babylon. Here's Jeremiah complaining, oh God, I'm getting beaten and put through the smelter, and I'm getting beaten and I'm being folded and beaten and shaped and sharpened and folded and beaten and shaped. And God's saying, yeah, I'm making you into hard metal. Now, you see, God is saying, I've set you free. The disaster that's coming, I have ensured your freedom. Here's a little snippet to part 200. The Babylonians come in. They destroy the city, and Nebuchadnezzar orders his chief of staff, a man by the name of Nebuzaradan. Say that with a mouthful of marbles. Nebuzaradan looks out for Jeremiah. This is really interesting because he goes around the city and says, where is Jeremiah? He finds Jeremiah in prison, releases Jeremiah, and says to Jeremiah, the king of Babylon has said to me, has authorized me to tell you, you can have whatever you want. Now, I don't know what you think of as the word freedom, but that sounds like it right there to me. Now, interestingly, Jeremiah uses that freedom. How does he use that freedom? He says, no, thank you. Which is an interesting understanding of Christian liberty. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Jeremiah goes down to Egypt, and you'll have to wait to part 200 to find out what happens then. Anyway, verse 18. Why is my pain unceasing? My wound incurable, refusing to be healed. Will you be to me like a deceitful brook, like waters that fail? Now, this is really Jeremiah's complaint. And I think we've covered the fact that Jeremiah's in a low place. He's now doing something. And I want to point out three things that I see here. It sounds like Jeremiah has a complaint against God. So here's the question. How do you lodge a complaint against God? Here's three things. Number one, notice that Jeremiah's praying this. James 5:13 says, is anyone suffering? Let him pray. And Jeremiah's complaint was a private complaint. First thing, make your prayer a private prayer. Your complaint a private prayer. Secondly, Jeremiah's really not complaining to have a go at God. He's actually crying out for help. In the midst of his despair, he wants God to be the very things that he's complaining about. He wants God to be his healer. He wants God to be like a refreshing brook of water. So really, make your complaint a cry for help. The third thing Jeremiah did was, whether he realised it or not, he now had to brace himself for how God was going to answer. And that's what we're going to look at, how God answered. And God shocked him with his answer. But nonetheless, when you cry out to God in complaint, God answers. God's the God who answers.